Welcome to the Grow It Forward podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Tracy, Levine. Today I will be talking with Nitin Kumar, the CEO of Appnomic.
Nitin, one of the things that was really interesting about you when I was doing research, your background is really, really impressive. But the one thing that stood out about you being a CEO and what you do that you don't see very often is I noticed that in the midst of raising $22 million at the end of last year, you also got an online degree in blockchain, a certified artificial intelligence, certified autonomous driving professional. And I think that's really interesting to see a CEO who is willing to go back and get even more education and continue to learn. And I think that's the most impressive thing that I saw in your background. Have you always been that way? And, what motivates you when you've done so much to go back and just learn more?
Tracy, firstly, you need to tell me which intelligence agency do you work for? I don't know whether you're for CIA, Mossad, KGB. You seem to be on top of your game. All right.
I'm just so impressed because one of the things that I think makes great leaders in this day and age is the people who are willing to upskill and be ready for the 21st century.
Yeah.
And by upskilling, it makes you a leader that if I'm really a top talent, I'm going to want to work for you because if I bring an idea, you're going to understand it. What was the motivation when you did this?
So let's think about it, right? Let's think about the times we live in, Tracy. Let me make it very practical, right? In the last century, or should we call it the last millennia, the industry, the market, and companies valued people who could take a skill set and sort of give it a shelf life. And that shelf life could be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever. There was a certain market value associated with that. And there are some things that corroborate what I just said, right? Companies used to have the grand 15-year strategy, 20-year strategy, 25-year strategy, and the lower short-term strategy used to be 5, 10 years. We cannot think about things like that anymore, right? You just get obsolete in a couple of years. And the change around us is so profound that what you know today is very quickly obsolete tomorrow. It doesn't even hit individuals and companies. I mean, whole industries vanish. Think about a typewriter industry. And particularly the sector that I play in, which is technology, media, and telecom, there is just so much disruption and change. And unless you're constantly upgrading your skill set, talking to more people, getting ahead, seeing what's coming, and getting into the nuts, going to sort of narrow the degrees of freedom that you have as a leader, as an executive, as a practitioner, as a coach, or as an employee. So I'm a believer in that, and I've pivoted my career 3 times, and each time it's somewhat been a result of how I have gone about learning and what value I ended up creating. And for the luck of the draw, I've been fairly successful at my 3 or 4 career pivots as well.
Well, and I'm not surprised because once again, when I look at what you learned, what was most impressive to me is that you did not silo learn. And while everything you learned was in technology, I thought it was really interesting that you were very purposeful about learning about different parts of technology and not just one part. And is that the way you've always approached things? Figure out what the holistic picture is and figure out all the different pieces you need to learn? Because it looks like you're somebody who's willing to just roll up their sleeves and figure it out.
No, I think that is very important. There's a couple, 3 different questions in that. So let me try to answer them to the best of my abilities. So the way business is going, I think technology is the business, right? You don't buy CDs anymore. It's on digital asset. You don't buy books anymore. Now, there are many people who buy books, but generally you can consume content. So everything has got a technology. I'm actually very passionate about business models and creating out-of-the-box business models and kind of innovating ahead. And today, more than any other part of this whole new millennia that we have embarked on, it's more important that technology is going to be ingrained in everybody's life, right?
Right.
Come and say that I'm an artificial intelligence expert. It's like telling me I know the internet back in the 90s, right? It's not something that you learn and become an expert in. It's just going to be ingrained in everything that you do in future. So I think just thinking ahead, thinking broader and selectively going deep, where your passions and interests lie, actually come a long way. You can see what's coming, what's not working, what can work better, and then quickly move the needle.
Well, what's really interesting, you talk about seeing what's coming. And when I was looking at some of the things you've done, numbers struck me as really interesting. It said that you had led over 1,000 M&A deals. And from that broad experience you have, has that made it easier for you to, when you're looking at companies or that you're running or advising along the way, was it easier for you to know when that company needed to pivot? Because a lot of people right now are trying to figure out in the economy, which has changed for them, whether they need to pivot. So what would you tell them about that with all your experience you've had?
No, I think that is a very, very, very intriguing question. The way you think about those 1,000 deals is that a good part of them, 80% of them, are actually upfront doing due diligence. What that really means is that you assess the financial, operational, commercial, technical posture of the company and see what's relevant, what's unique, what is cutting edge, and what's kind of having the risk of obsolescence, right? And when either strategic buyers or investors want to put money into the company, they're going to ask you two things. Hey, what are the risks and what are the opportunities? And how much money do I need to pour into this to get those opportunities or capture the value or mitigate the risks, right? And about 50% of them will ask you the last question: would you invest in the company? And sometimes I'll think and go, yes, I would. Sometimes it's a no. The in-between guys are the problem, right? Because I think there is so much you can do to pivot them, and you get a full view of that. And because you get a full view of the business, then you can go into integration, transformation, business models, and all that kind of stuff. But you can generally look at the pulse of the company and say, I think you need a partial pivot or a full pivot, because you can look at a P&L holistically, and also look at the big secular trends in the market and see whether this company is going to make it, just about make it, or it's going to fall apart, or is this just going to be a rock star that's in the making?
Well, in that context, when I think about, what's going on today, I always, think about that really attractive companies get funded in good markets and bad markets. And how, if you're a company looking at your company and thinking, do I need to pivot? Am I really attractive? Am I somebody that could be funded in a good or not so good economy? What are some of the factors they should be looking at as they just look at pivoting or, going forward?
So let me give you two views on this, right? One view I will give you as an executive running a startup and having been in operating roles. And the second view, let me give you from an investor perspective. Let's go to the investor first. I think the investor is not okay with run rate costs. They're okay with one-time costs if you want to pivot. So keep that in mind. Number two is that I think no investor wants to take market risk because it's uncontrollable, right? A, you're disrupted. B, there's a COVID. C, there's nothing you can do about it and all that. Right. They're okay with a little bit of execution risk because I think those are fixable, controllable, and they can unlock value from that. So that's sort of an investor view. I think they would shy away a little bit if you have created market risk for yourself. Let's go to a very practical example, right? Mm-hmm. We are in the times of COVID right now and we are locked in. There are many software as a services or SaaS companies. And there's really a model that was gung-ho. All the investors were like all over this thing. But if you get into the details of that, you can price it by subscription. And that really means that, hey, Tracy is going to pay for it, Nitin's going to pay for it, John is going to pay for it, and whoever has a login ID is going to pay for it, right? Great. And then there's a model that we're going to pay by transaction, which is, if I'm in an Uber, I get a percentage of a transaction cut and stuff like that, right? Now, that model has completely fallen apart. So basically, you have your software in there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I don't know how long, and it's for free. So those kind of things are the things you need to think about in terms of, okay, if I'm stuck in a situation like that, how do I pivot? And what is the right time when I should pivot? And again, I don't want to overplay this COVID theme, but I'm just going to say in general, the bigger question that as a business unit owner or an executive or an entrepreneur you ask yourself is that, Do I just need to pivot because it's just a fashionable thing to do in the Silicon Valley, and you will be
Yeah.
ending up in a place that you don't want to be? Okay, but there are a few factors you should evaluate and ask yourself really the hard questions whether a pivot makes sense.
So if you decide that you really do need to make a pivot, what does a good pivot look like?
So let's peel the onion on that into two places, right? One is that understanding the timing of the pivot is extremely critical. Okay, I would look at if the market's too crowded and you're starting to become a Me Too player, or a larger company has got more muscle capital and all are starting to come at you with that force. I think you may need to sort of ask yourself, maybe I need to do something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another sign is that there are pieces of your assets in the business that perform a little bit better than the others, and some of them just can't be rejuvenated in spite of your best efforts. And if you look at it from a software point of view, again, pardon my software speak, because this is where I grew up, right? There are features that people value. They may not necessarily value, but you're burdening them with the cost structure of the entire product. So I've seen cases where a feature has become the product, and some of the products have been kind of demoted to be a feature in the large scheme of things, right? So look at your asset performance and see whether everything is making money, what is performance, what is potential, what are headwinds, and maybe if I correct the asset posture, there may be an opportunity there, right? And
Right.
then customer responses. A lot of people come and say, hey, I love your product, right? I love your demo, it's great. It's all these super things and we love it. But the moment they have to cut a check and pay for it, everybody is suddenly gone, right? If that
Right.
keeps
Right.
happening repeatedly, if that cap happens more and more than one occasion and it's just not the price tag, and if it's a price tag, you'll know everybody's a smart individual who runs the, and then you actually have to ask yourself a really hard question: is there a product market fit, right?
Right.
Then other pivots coming from, like I gave you an example, I need to change my pricing rate because I'm just stuck in a bad spot and it's just going to be really hard. Also, we consistently learn from the market. There are new insights. You talk to new people, you get some ideas, you see some other parts of the world, you see other parts of the industry, and you learn and you develop new insights and you have an aha moment. Right? So one point is that you need to sort of really decide what are the reasons for the pivot and when to pivot. Okay. Then coming
Right.
back to the second, what does a good pivot look like? And I have had many people who I constantly meet on the 101 highway in the Silicon Valley, and they generally say, okay, I moved these 4 features on the product, or I'm now going to serve financial services as opposed to healthcare, and then we think that we have done a pivot. That's not necessarily the right way to think about it. Okay, good pivots typically have 4 anchors, and you don't necessarily have to have pull all the 4 anchors here, right? I mean, it's
Right.
one or more.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's really the big question to ask: are my products profitable currently, or do I have more upside? Am I using the products and putting them in the right channels? Are they efficient? Are they expensive? Are they reasonable? And are these channels hitting the right target market? For example, if I have to sell something to the babies, am I selling them to the mother, or am I just going to somebody else, to the nanny? The mother is only an influencer, right? So
Right.
it's the nitty gritty is like that. Who is the target market, and does my brand have recognition there? Once, and your best case scenario is your most profitable products in the best channels, touching the right customer segment, and your brand is recognized, right? You have a reasonably good recognition. You have the exact opposite and everything in between. So there's a lot that you can come in vacuum, and suddenly, because it's a buzzword, you've executed a pivot. And then you also have to look at: do I have the right people? What worked for business posture A is not necessarily going to be working for business posture B. And am I capitalized correctly? One
Right.
of the big issues of a pivot is that you also need to let the old die and embrace the new. You don't have infinite capital. Even as a mid-sized business, you cannot fund both the old and new. The fear of letting go comes and gets you, right? What happens if my old business, and people kind of get stuck in that limbo, and it becomes a big problem. You're neither here nor there. So in a good pivot, you need to make a very bold decision, and you say, my old is not going to be funded. Capital, resources, talent, money, time is all going to go into the new. I have full confidence, I've validated from the market, and I'm willing to let go of the old, right?
Right.
It's a hard choice, and many of us come to that point in our life where old is still feeding us, new ain't paying the bills yet, but you have to make that decision.
Well, something you said that really caught my attention with that last statement. How do people get into the mindset of saying this was just sunk cost and not focus on all the time and money they spent getting their baby basically up and running, and now they're realizing the baby's ugly? And that's a hard thing to mentally let go of.
It's a very hard thing to do. It's more mental than scientific here. Having said that, I think every one of us does it at some point in life, not necessarily in the business realm. You put your money into some stock market, and some stocks are just not going to cut it. You just don't hold on to it, right? You cut your losses, and then you put your money somewhere that it can grow. Same thing, you buy some real estate investments, they don't pan out, something happens, you just move on, right? You don't hold on to those things. So if you can do it as an individual in 5, 6, 7 different scienarios, you just need to tell yourself, I can do it. It's a very emotional decision. It's more mental than scientific to cut those things off from your life. Having said that, in different walks of life, we all do it, right? We all do it in other walks of life, and you can example, we all have bought bad stocks. You don't hold on to them forever. You cut your losses, take the money, put it somewhere else where it can make money. Some people have bought bad real estate investments, and you cut your losses and go. So you need to just ask yourself whether I can do it. There are a couple of barriers here. One is that you need that, yes, my new plan is well informed. I've thought through well. I have the capital structure, and I have the right people. This is where the other problems in when you pivot. You absolutely have to be sure your talent is correct when you execute that pivot. You cannot make the fatal description of taking John and Sally and somebody and building a job description around them. No. You build a job description, and then you can take a chance. If the skills and the attitude and the ability to execute a pivot fit 70, 80% of those skills and attributes required, I will take a chance on John and Sally and whoever, right? But
Right.
I ain't putting XYZ and building a job description around them. I think that is a recipe for disaster.
And that's very interesting, because you do see people pivot and not pivot the team. And you do see not optimal outcomes. One of the other things, if we could go back when we were peeling the onion on the Me Too statement, you said, while we're watching the news, it seems like everybody is moving to technology that helps the remote worker, who helps with conference calls. And my question to you is, when people look at the opportunities, how do they not pivot into a red ocean strategy where they're once again in something transactional and not something that's cutting edge?
So it's a harder question to answer, right? Different people think about it differently. When I talked about the SaaS software doing transaction stuff and the economy was high, right? People rode that wave. And these COVID things and black swans that doesn't happen to people, and that doesn't happen to them. So there's a little bit of that mindset thinking here. Having said that, in the COVID scenario, the big situation we are in is the following. In a normal place, when a computer virus hits you, it hits your digital system. Then you switch into your business continuity operation, right? So I will manually enter my order, or I will do it on the phone because I don't have a system, just to give you an example.
Right.
It's not efficient, it's not fast, it's not cutting edge and all that stuff. But it still works. I can keep the business going. What's different in this is that it's actually come and hit your digital systems. It's actually come and hit your physical systems, where your ability to do manual stuff and face-to-face has gone away. And people had not invested enough in digital. So I was talking to a friend of mine in Microsoft, so this is coming from them. What he was telling me is that these features for remote work and Microsoft Whiteboard and Teams and all have existed for 100 years. People just never use them. Now you
Right.
have a compelling catalyst and you're revisiting your business model. And come to think of us, all these people who go to the office, and including me and you were guilty of this. Sometimes we go to the office, we call and email our colleagues, right? So you should have thought about it at that point in time. But now you have a catalyst, so change, right?
Right. And that's interesting. And this, all this change leads into, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you're doing today, because I would have to think in today's market, your product that you're working on, Appnomics, which you are the CEO of, was very appealing before all of this started. I would have to think after the events that have happened at the beginning of the year, it's even more appealing. Can you tell us a little bit more about your company and what they're doing and how companies can optimize now using it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about it. So what Appnomic stands for is autonomous applications, right? Autonomic apps. What Appnomic really does is that it's using artificial intelligence to detect performance problems in your technology landscape, to predict them and autonomously fix them, right? And we call ourselves the self-healing software based on artificial intelligence. What used to happen in the normal steady state is that people were geared, or at least the IT departments were geared, to detect any performance problem quickly and fix it even faster. Our value prop is that what if the problem didn't even happen, right? You watch all these incidents in your events in your tape and say, oh, well, let's cut the root causes off so that this doesn't manifest into a problem on Monday and Tuesday. Now, how this has helped us in the COVID time is that ever since Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone cannot not provision this much bandwidth. So there's a lot of workloads coming in there, and they need to debottleneck in real time. A similar situation is happening on e-commerce, on media and gaming, on enterprise software. So we caught a little bit of a tailwind there, and we were lucky. We were not so lucky on the other side of the house, that we had some exposure to travel and hospitality and banking and those kind of verticals. And we don't have the ability to pivot into other industries who are spending high, like federal. So you watch your capital structure and dollars to pivot there. And we made a decision, no. And that's how we kind of think about the way of the world, is that do more with less, drive more in existing customers, and catch the tailwind where you are, and don't worry about the headwind for now, because we're going to bang our head there for 100 years and not fix it, and we're at the mercy of COVID.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you the question a little bit differently. I'm sure you've heard the statistic that there are 6.8 people involved in the decision of buying software. So for the non-technical person, I feel like the word AI is used in every new product because it sounds cool. And everybody knows that they should be buying AI. So for the non-technical person sitting on that committee deciding whether to buy your software, can you explain the software to them in a non-technical way that they can understand what it means that it's AI and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, right, digital and AI are the most abused words in the industry today. It's like saying that, I know internet back in the 90s, and everybody knows it's not one thing, right?
Right.
So when you talk to your economic buyer, and I think that 6.8 is about like 7.8 or 8.8 in the times of COVID, because you don't have one sales meeting, you have half a dozen of them. So the way you explain it is that you really understand your economic buyer, right? Are you talking to the CIO? Are you talking to the VP operations? Are you talking to the chief digital officer? Who are you talking to, and what is in it for them, right? And it's a very simple, way of explaining. So on an average, in every enterprise, there are 250,000 severity one high crazy problems that will blow the earth out of the solar system occurring every year. If you deploy Appnomic, those don't happen, right? You just eliminate those 250,000. The second dimension to that is if you want to fix those 250,000 incidents, you deploy more than 1 million man hours in a year. Okay, those million man hours today are A, not available all the time, B, not available at full productivity, and C, are fairly expensive to deploy. So those man hours are saved in addition to your 250,000. Proposition number 3, everybody has over provisioned hardware, and these are the times of cost reduction. And you cannot over provision for a certain spike. Let's take Black Friday, right? You have a sudden spike of shoppers coming in, and a company has provisioned 30, 40, 50, put a number, $1 million of hardware on that, just to handle that spike so that we don't lose shoppers. What we tell them is that we have an artificial intelligence patent health thing, which can look at the workload coming in and say, we zone these users so that you don't have to have this much hardware. For example, when a workload comes in, I'm going to tell my artificial intelligence to look at the workload. It's going to identify, Tracy is a shopper. We should have her process the transaction. She's entering the last digit of her credit card. This Nitin Kumar guy came for browsing, right? You'll hold him back for like a 1.5 second. So if you just zone the people there, you cut down on hardware substantially. That is about 30-35% software and hardware costs saved on an annual basis, which is pretty substantial in the COVID times. So when you reach the persona who's not going into events and algorithms and technology, you speak in ROI language, right? Financial and commercial and operational. And that is what resonates with the buyer. Do your homework, go look at their technology posture, whatever you can find out from the outside, and see how you can impact them in a positive manner.
I think that's great because I come off Wall Street and I only speak ROI. And so I think, the miss for a lot of companies is they forget that C-suite is buying you because you could answer their problem and they want to know how much you're going to save them versus cost them. And I think that was very, very insightful. And if you don't mind, I want to ask you a career question because as a career coach, I've been getting a lot of calls from parents. As you can imagine, their kids are graduating from college or they're graduating from high school, and they're very perplexed by this job market because it looks nothing like what they graduated into. And they hear all this talk about technology. If you were advising someone, what are the top technology skills, whether you graduate from high school or graduating from college, that you think are must-have skills in order to be a top talent and, employee that people are going to want to hire?
See, their era is going to be shaped by 3 things in future. One is artificial intelligence, and bear in mind, artificial intelligence isn't the monster that people make it out to be in data science and stuff like that. It's, again, I keep going back to this example. It's like the internet. If you didn't understand how to use the internet, a lot of us wouldn't have jobs today. So I think AI is something which is a must pick up for everybody, not just graduates. Everybody needs to be at least artificial intelligence savvy, an AI user, an AI business model builder, commercializing AI, understanding legal aspects of AI, right? Understanding how to use that in media. So there are very many different aspects of AI. It's not one thing. So that is a must. I think the second wave that is going to happen is the behavioral shifts on how we consume content and how we compute. You didn't have the app industry just even 10 years ago, right? And I think in another 10, we are going to be talking virtual reality and augmented reality, and some of these smartphones that we have may no longer be considered as smart, right? So I think about content, think about consumption, think about how you can use AR and VR, right? I mean, for example, when I say AR and VR, it sounds very technical. It's not necessarily that. I mean, if you're in an autonomous car 15 years from now, right, when some of these graduates are at the peak of your career, or 5 years you need to, or even in 5 years, right? Who knows when that is coming. I can have a beach in my car. I can have a yoga studio. I can have whatever I want, right? So the interiors and design and all that's going to go very differently. So that's sort of the two big technologies that I would see that are going to be sort of necessary to grasp in some size, shape, and form. The third one I would say is communication, but again, that's all slightly for the more technically bent, right? Because
Right.
all of this infrastructure, content, and all this is going to sit on either 5G or the satellites and vehicle-to-vehicle communication and all that. So I think that's sort of the third vector. And then there are a number of different things that are hinging on all of these. Take drones, take blockchain, take all of these. So those are more specialized and secondary, but primarily if you're savvy about AR, VR, and AI and the communication technologies, I think you could successfully be a business executive, be a technology executive, and also weave yourself in the ecosystem, right? I mean, the legalities are going to change. The consumption is going to change. The creativity behind that is going to change. So don't think of just technology as for the geeks or engineers. There is a lot of jobs and opportunity that is woven around a specific technology. Just to give you an example, right? I mean, the whole AI ethics. Should the car decide where to stop, who to kill, who to save? When I wear the AR, VR headset on my eye, are you going to now know who I am exactly based on my retina? Am I really ready to do that? There is a legal angle there. There's a privacy angle there. What content works on computer is not necessarily optimized for the phone. What's optimized the phone is not going to be necessarily optimized for VR. So there's a lot of room for artists and creatives and things like that. So again, my last thought, just to not belabor the point, technology is not one thing. Technology is many different things. If you're savvy enough, you understand it reasonably well enough, you could fit somewhere in the ecosystem. There are plenty of jobs to be created from the advent of new technology.
Well, Nitin, I'm going to end the interview where I started it. What impressed me most about you as a CEO, and you really do have an incredibly impressive background from managing startups to multi-billion-dollar organizations, but it really does stand out that you're somebody who is definitely an architect of your career. And by going back and learning, even though you've had so much success, that was something that really stood out. And as I look at, you deciding going to go back and learn, my question to you is, do you think this is something everybody's going to have to do, continually go back and learn new things? And how often do you think that's going to happen with how fast it seems like technology is changing?
I can't keep up, Tracy, quite honestly, but I think it's just inevitable that things are going to change so quickly, right?
Right.
I am right now teaching myself to adapt to voice technology and completely go away from typing and handwriting. So I'm going through a lot of pain there. But I think in a couple, 3 weeks, my productivity will get to a point and I will let go of the past, right? I'm already
Right.
getting better. Both Google Assistant and Cortana are having lesser problems with my convoluted mixed global accent. So we're going to get there, right? Having
Right.
said that, everybody will have to change and adapt because what exists today is not going to exist tomorrow. As I said, I mean, we didn't have some of these industries that I mentioned before just 10 years ago, and people have made careers out of these, right?
Right.
I think the ability to also morph and adapt your learning style, and this is something I wanted to share with people on how you do this, right? And when you are now talking to people, you're not from the 1990s or 2005 or even 2010. People are still reading the same articles or you were reading, and they're reading the same books. The information arbitrage is gone, right? So you
Right.
no longer have the ability to milk it. And you have so much content and you have short attention spans and you don't sort of have time in the day to learn new things. And this is a common gripe. So somebody like me had to really adapt my learning style. One of the things I asked myself, what do I have as an asset? I said, I have such a great network. So let me use that, right? So I would take the CV Insights. They used to pump like 50 logos on autonomous driving or blockchain and send it to me. And I look at those logos and say, okay, I need to meet all 100 of these people. By the time you meet 20, 30 of these people, you start seeing things they don't see. You know who can partner with who has a better business model, what are the nuances in the technology, where is an M&A deal, what have people thought through that others haven't thought through. So those patterns. By the time you have 50, 60 of these conversations, I think you start to resemble some sort of an expert. Because all these guys have done some sort of a market research. Then you can sort of validate it with internet research and all that stuff. But I'm telling you, you want to pick up a new topic, go meet 50 people. I think you will almost be right up there in terms of how much you absorb. If you hate reading books or podcasts and things like that, that's the new world order now, right? I mean, it's crowd learning, what I call it.
I agree. Well, Nitin, this has been a pleasure, and I really do appreciate you taking the time and sharing some insights with me today. And thank you so much.
Tracy, it's a pleasure, and glad to be here. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.